Hello and welcome to Cover to Cover here on Supersport, our semi-regular review of sporting books where I give you my opinion of what's on the bookshelves at the moment. If you're in the publishing game and you have a book for us, indeed if you're a self-publisher, we'd love to hear from you. And there is the address, sean.everett@supersport.com. Or indeed, if you'd just like to respond to anything that I've been saying over the weeks, we'd also like to hear from you. Let's move on then to today's book, and here it is, Winging It, On Tour with the Box by Liam Del Carme, published by Jacana and retailing in your shops now at 225 Rand. And one thing I don't really talk about on this program very often is presentation, but I'd just like to take my hat off to the people at Jacana. There it is on, and there it is off. And you'll just see the theme of the book is of course a passport with the colour and the design here, and on the inside genuine stamps from Liam's own passport. But the thing that really caught my imagination here was this beveled effect, and that really does give it the extra little bit of oomph that you need when you're in a busy bookshop and something stands out from the crowd, and that's the sort of thing that I think would do that. So well done to everybody involved. And before I go any further, of course, I have to do the usual citing of conflicts of interest. Liam Del Carme is an old friend of mine. We've been on tour together, we've bride together, indeed we've been on Super Saturday together. And one of the people who endorses this book is none other than Neil Andrews, but don't let that put you off. So let me put the book in a nutshell for you. This is an account of what it's like to be on tour with the Springboks as a member of the media. If you're looking for exhaustive analyses into how the Springboks played, this is not for you. This is the sort of book that's going to tell you what the Springboks were doing at 2 o'clock in the morning, getting out of a lift with a couple of young lasses. And speaking of ungodly hours, the recurring theme of the book is simply this. How does a simple scribe from South Africa get fed and watered after a long day of work, and when work is finally over for the day? Well, inevitably, I think we have a double-edged sword. The book offers insight into things that you'd never see in a normal rugby book, but I do think you need at least a passing interest in how news is produced in order to get the most from it. For me, of course, that's no problem, because being stuck in a foreign country with no internet connection and with a credit card that doesn't work is an achingly familiar theme. And I'm also familiar with the cast of characters herein that Liam writes about. Indeed, it's wonderful to see the Ken Borland headbutt story in print. And I'll go on to talk about the Wouter Ngubeni little incident with the New Zealand police in the 2011 World Cup. Now, fortunately for those who don't know the cast as well as I do, Liam's powers of description are at their best when he's introducing his mates. If you're interested also in writing sport for a living, then Liam's 25 years of experience across the broad swathe of South African media is really going to give you a lot of help. He's been there and done that. Indeed, my favourite story is a media story at its best. It concerns the short-lived newspaper that Liam wrote for This Day, which was edited by the great Justice Malala, but owned by a slightly mysterious Nigerian fellow, Nduka Obegbeni. Now, Justice managed to shame Nduka into finding the money to send Liam on the 2004 Tri-Nations tour. Nduka produced a roll of dollars from his top pocket, gave it to Liam, and he was on a flight to Australia the next day. At the end of the Tri-Nations tour, he had a few dollars left, so he went to the bank and wanted to change them into rands, and the bank teller put them under one of those lights that they have and said, "Where did you get this money from?" Because it had, under infrared, you could see the little pink stains that said counterfeit. I'm not going to tell you the full story because you'll have to read the book for that, but it is a cracker, I can tell you. Now, perhaps the most important part of the book, given the Black Lives Matter movement, is chapter 7 on simply being black. It, of course, deals with Wouter Ngubeni's racial profiling in Taupo. In short, he was in a pub, went for a leak, and when he came back, the cops decided that he was a drug dealer. And the pure act of emptying the bladder of a black man turned into a big diplomatic incident. I'm happy to say it had a happy ending, but unconscious racism is far more prevalent. And Liam points it out in his typically understated fashion. I want to quote from the book here. Late night in Buenos Aires, you might be asked, where are the drugs? Airport security might ask you to step aside more than they do your travel companions. Japanese kids may look at you as if you've just stepped out of their video game. More often than not, you're able to laugh it off. Close quotes. Well, what about when you're not able to laugh it off? When you're in your own country and Springbok supporters are saying things in Afrikaans like the soccer's tomorrow or something a lot nearer the knuckle. These kinds of supporters are the ones that the Boks can do without. In the early 90s, the press called them the Poffer Bikies because they tended to be members of tour groups who were given these jackets to ward off the cold European winter. And in these more enlightened times, they're still called the Poffers by the press, and they are to be avoided. Anyway, let's get back to the book. It's an easy and engaging read with each chapter divided into bite-sized pieces. The narrative hops around to an extent, and sometimes you can forget what year you're in. And that peregrination means it can seem a little repetitive at times. And the final chapter, written against deadline and in hotel rooms and on trains in Japan at the 2019 World Cup, lacks the wise overview of the rest of the book. But it does, of course, give us a real-time insight into the problems of producing copy on the run, which is ultimately the whole raison d'etre of the book. And I give it a very good 6 out of 10. That's it for today. And thank you very much for watching. Since much of Winging It has to deal with press conferences, here's a quote from a Bob Dylan press conference. 1965, he was asked for his personal philosophy of life, and he said, "Keep a clear head, always carry a light bulb."